it's your friendly neighborhood Sarah back with another video about The Office. And this time I want to talk about Andy because I have a lot of thoughts about Andy's character. Like 8 pages worth. So here we go. But no, in all honesty, this is a problem that has bugged me for a while, and I just felt the need to diagnose the problem, to see if I could come up with a solution to fix this problem that I was having with, I want to say, one of my favorite characters, but it's very, very difficult for me to say that he's one of my favorite characters because of a lot of the really bad moments that happened for him in the last few seasons. So this video is going to be about what they should have done with Andy's character instead of what they did do with Andy's character. Andy's character went from being unlikable to likable after his anger management to even more unlikable at the very end of the series. Some of the best Andy moments come from the seasons where he's manager, and unfortunately some of the worst Andy moments. So I want to explore how this character assassination could have been avoided without changing the outcome of the series. How could Andy have gotten the ending that his character deserved? Because I really don't think he did. So first, there are a few character traits that Andy has throughout the series that make us really want to root for him. First off, he's a hopeless romantic. We can see this with how he treats Angela in the weight loss episodes at the beginning of season 5. He even tells her that he doesn't care where they get married. He just wants to be with her. Despite this, she cheats on him consistently with somebody who he considers a friend. So ultimately, we as the viewers want Andy to find love. Not an unrequited love, but the kind of love that is returned to him. We want him to be happy with somebody. We also know that Andy's father is a real jerk to him, so we also want him to be successful in gaining his father's respect. And we also want him to be successful with the anger management training that he's gone through. We don't want to see any more Andy outbursts because, as funny as they were, he overcame them ultimately. Andy was an unlikable character before he went to anger management classes in season 3. Where Michael is unlikable because of his rude comments and inappropriate jokes, Andy is unlikable because he's annoying. And he gets mad way too easily. Andy starts off as that annoying coworker who a lot of people can relate to. The one with the weird quirks who's always humming or singing or tapping on things or clicking their pen or just making an obnoxious amount of noise and not realizing that other people can hear it. Andy also fits into the stereotype of that guy who went to an Ivy League college and has a regular person job and gets paid a regular person's salary, you know, not like a big high level position in the company, yet still talks about his days at the Ivy League college, still brags about going to Cornell, even though people who went to cheaper, less prestigious colleges, or even didn't go to college like Michael, are all basically doing the same job as him. Michael is his boss, and he didn't even go to college. So the fact that Andy went to an Ivy League college hasn't really affected his standing in life, or at least his position in the office, but yet he's constantly talking about it. And of course, again, this is another stereotype of that annoying coworker who's reliving the glory days from college because they just can't move past that. The one thing that actually makes Andy's character sort of interesting is his anger management issue. He comes off as this cheesy, not too serious type of guy until something upsets him. He gets irritated and he can't seem to handle that irritation, and then suddenly he's punching walls or kicking things over. You know, he's getting irrationally angry about something that probably should not have triggered that level of a response. This doesn't do much in regards to making his character likable, but the writers do work on that, fortunately. So after Andy returns from anger management in season 3, episode 20, his character is definitely more likable. This new Andy tries to be more positive about his interactions with people at work. He learns to enjoy his work environment more. He finds himself in a relationship, he gains more solid friendships, and he doesn't seem to mind that he's bad at his job. He really falls into the role of the lovable goof in the office. He seems to be more self-aware than he was before he went to anger management. So by the time Andy is chosen to be manager in season 8, I think we have already found ourselves rooting for Andy. His fiance has cheated on him. His parents, we find out in, I think, season 6, episode 17. Yeah, we find out that his parents had originally named him after his father, but when his younger brother was born, they thought that he fit the Walter Bernard Jr. name better than Andy did. So they renamed Andy to Andy. One of his old girlfriends starts dating one of his coworkers, so that's kind of awkward for him. Andy is bad at making friends, bad at sales, and he lives his life fixated on the glory days of college. And he really seems fixated on being a part of a group, the a cappella group that he was in college. So we feel like Andy's character needs some sense of belonging somewhere. I think the reason he's fixating on the a cappella group in college is because he doesn't feel like he fits in really anywhere, and especially not in the office. But the writers do change that, as we see in season 8. Also, despite being from a wealthy family and going to an Ivy League school, Andy doesn't live a life that's really worth bragging about. And because he's had so many misfortunes like these, we the viewers find ourselves wanting Andy to succeed. We want something positive to happen for this character that we've grown to like over the last 7 seasons. So when he's chosen as a manager, it does seem like a positive thing for his character. And in some ways it is, but unfortunately, like I said before, in some ways we get the worst Andy moments, and it is really disappointing. So I want to start off focusing on the positive moments we get from Andy's time as manager. Andy is manager from season 8 to season 9, the last 2 seasons of The Office. So in season 8, episode 1, the new CEO, Robert California, I hate his name, and I hate Robert California, but that's a whole nother video for another time. But so Robert California is hanging around the office, and he's getting to know the employees. He's put Andy in charge, so he's making sure that everything's running smoothly on that front, with Andy being in a management role for the first time in his life. And they find his notebook, Robert California's notebook. They find his notebook where he has separated the people in the office into winners and losers columns. Now, when Andy realizes that this is causing some stress to his employees, he actually confronts Robert California. So he confronts Robert about why some of the people in the office were put into the losers column. As you can imagine, it's probably really stressful to find out that your new CEO thinks that you're a loser. So Robert California gets in front of the office and he basically tells the winners to prove him right and the losers to prove him wrong. And then comes one of my favorite scenes, one of my favorite Andy moments. Andy shakes his head in disagreement with this sentiment, and he actually walks into the conference room that Robert California has been working out of and decides to confront him about this. So Andy, in his first ever episode that we see him as manager in, Andy confronts the CEO of the company. He tells California loud enough for everybody in the office to hear, though this is not intentional. He tells California a reason why every single person he had put on the losers column was actually a winner in Andy's book. Aside from Gabe, but we can make a video about Gabe sometime too, you guys. Gabe is... I don't know how I feel about Gabe. So this is not a Gabe video. So he gives a reason why every single person that Robert has deemed a loser actually is a winner in his book. This was a great moment for Andy. This is Andy's way of taking power over that feeling of being a failure. He was seen as a loser by his peers and by his parents. So I think he's using his position as the manager of these people to stand up for them, to make sure that they don't end up feeling the way that he has felt for most of his adult life. And it was a really wonderful moment. This was one of the moments where I kind of said, yeah, I like Andy as manager. He's a good choice. So my next favorite Andy moment is it's in episode 2 of season 8, where he has the incentive. In order to boost the sales in the office, Andy has an incentive where if they reach some ridiculous number of sales that he doesn't think they can obtain, they can choose a tattoo for him to get on his butt. This kind of speaks to his goofy side too. Like, he suggests something completely ridiculous just in the heat of the moment because he doesn't think they're going to achieve the goal that he set for them. But they do. And the original design is something grotesque, like a baby coming out of his butt or something. And so when they're at the tattoo shop, Pam tells Andy that nobody expects him to go through with it. Like, obviously they did a good job, they made the sales, but nobody expects him to get a tattoo of a baby on his butt, right? And Andy does something shocking. He still agrees to go through with it. Because he made a promise to these people, he decides he wants to keep that promise. It's only after Andy has committed to this so much that he's already laying down in the tattoo artist's chair that the employees decide to change the image to something cuter and a little more personal for him. I believe they choose a little dog wearing a sweater that says Nard, like his nickname, Nard Dog. And this is a great moment for Andy's character. In the previous episode, we saw Andy accepting his employees for who they were, choosing to focus on their positive attributes rather than on the negative things, rather than on their flaws. So in this episode, we see the office workers doing the same in turn to Andy. They are accepting Andy as their leader, as somebody they admire and respect. They could have gone through with getting something really gross tattooed on his butt, but because he is so dedicated to them, and because he seems to really care about them as people, as human beings, they also, in turn, have a mutual respect for him, and they end up turning it into something positive for him as well. Now, this is something we didn't really see with Michael's character. The mutual respect between the boss and his employees is something we didn't really get with Michael's character. As much as we want to say that we know Michael and his employees got along and we know that they liked each other, there was definitely, I think, way too many moments of him being inappropriate or disrespectful for them to ever have this kind of bond and this kind of relationship that Andy has already managed to make in the first 2 episodes of his season as manager. Why I think this character development works well for Andy is because of the things that I mentioned earlier, the reasons why we as viewers are rooting for Andy. Again, compared to Michael Scott, who didn't go to college at all, Andy has an Ivy League education. So, first of all, he's probably more qualified for the manager's position. Second, Andy's life keeps handing him bad luck cards. There was the low point that he hit that resulted in his anger management classes. There was his cheating fiance. There was being the black sheep of his family. So, Andy knows what it's like to feel disrespected. He knows what it's like to feel unappreciated. So when Andy's employees meet this seemingly impossible goal that he sets for them, he responds with appreciation towards them. And I think that this is a really telling character trait. Again, I think this is very good character development. I think it makes sense for his character to have responded this way. And it is one of the moments that makes me really like Andy's character. Then in episode 4, we get another heartwarming Andy moment. Remember that dad of his we talked about? The one who renamed his older son when his younger son was born because he thought he better deserved the name? Yeah, that guy. Well, in this episode, we finally see Andy get some closure about this issue. In season 8, episode 4, Andy throws a garden party that is, on the surface, an attempt to try and impress his boss. However, the party is also an attempt to try and gain his father's attention and ultimately his respect. Andy's younger brother, Walter Jr., had thrown a garden party previously where he invited his father to sing a duet with him up on stage. So Andy tries to get his father to sing a duet with him too at his own garden party. And unfortunately, his attempt to gain his father's attention is upstaged by his younger brother jumping up on the stage and finishing the duet with their father. So Andy kind of withdraws from the party at this moment. He decides to go inside the house and sit in the room where Cece is in her little portable crib. And shortly after, we see Andy's father come in to kind of confront him about the embarrassment that had just happened. Andy's father has already expressed disapproval in this episode that his son is just the manager of a paper company branch and not the actual CEO of the whole company. I guess he previously thought that Andy had risen the ranks a little bit higher, but he seems very disappointed, or he kind of scoffs, I think, at the idea of Andy being a manager of a branch of a paper company. So we already know that Andy's father is very disapproving and isn't really feeling the whole garden party thing. Honestly, I'm surprised he even came, but so when Andy's father comes into the room to confront him, he basically tells him that he needs to grow up. And he asks Andy how long he's going to go on needing his father's approval. This is a really harsh moment. This is, I think, one of the most important moments in Andy's character development. Since Cece Halpert is there in her little crib, Jim and Pam have the baby monitor on so that they can hear if anything goes wrong. And so unintentionally, all of the employees who are still outside overhear this conversation between Andy and his father. So when Andy's parents and brother leave the party, he returns outside, ready to leave the party himself. But when he comes outside, he finds that his employees are barbecuing and playing music, and they invite him over to come join the barbecue with them. They encourage Andy to stay and continue the party. And it seems a little more low-key and a little more his speed. So instead of throwing this big fancy party to try and impress his boss and his dad, it seems more now like just a group of people hanging out and enjoying each other's company. I think this was a great way to give Andy's character some closure about the whole thing with his father. At the end of the episode, it doesn't matter that his parents don't accept him because he's accepted by the people that he works with. These are ultimately the people that are closest to him every day. So their acceptance, while it's not the acceptance of a parent, their acceptance is the acceptance of his peers that he didn't really seem to have before now. So I think these three moments in particular are the most positive Andy moments that we get throughout the entire series. And they all happen at the beginning of season 8, at the beginning of Andy's stint as manager. But unfortunately, my least favorite Andy moments, and probably the worst Andy moments in the entire series, also happen while he's the manager. And that would be during seasons 8 and 9. So I'm going to talk about what happens with this character that's really negative and really bad. And then I want to kind of talk about how the writers could have avoided it completely. Perhaps the worst part about Andy's downfall as a character is his relationship with Aaron. Understandably, when Aaron sees that Andy is succeeding in his work life and his personal life, that he has more confidence than he used to, he doesn't really seem to have anger issues, she realizes that she wants a relationship with him again. And the problem with this is that Andy is actually in a relationship. He's with a beautiful, successful woman named Jessica. I believe she's a cross-country coach. She seems pretty well-rounded. She doesn't seem to have any weird quirks. She seems stable. His parents apparently have met her and they like her, so there's nothing wrong with Jessica from what we can tell, right? Erin is jealous of Jessica, and it's to the extent where she even tells Andy that she wishes Jessica was dead. And I think this happens at the Halloween party, so while she is drunk when she says this to him, it's still pretty concerning to me. It's definitely a red flag for sure. As viewers, we don't know much about Jessica, but we like Jessica. She seems stable. Well-rounded. Andy's parents even end up giving him the family ring to propose to her with. They take out the main stone because that has more of a his little brother vibe, because he's still their favorite child. But Jessica even seems to have given Andy the ability to kind of fix things with his family. She seems to be a very positive figure in his life. And while it's hard to tell based on how little we see Jessica whether or not the two of them are compatible for marriage, They definitely appear to be in a healthy, happy relationship. That is until episode 20 of season 8, when Andy drives down to Florida to get Aaron back. I just... So Aaron had gone down to Florida for a business trip, and I guess because she's upset about the fact that Andy's currently unavailable and seems happy with some other woman, she decides to stay in Florida forever. Now, when she informs Andy of her decision to stay in Florida, he finds himself missing her, and that's why he decides to drive down to Florida to get her. I think this is the moment where the writers decided that they were going to take Andy's character down. This is where the character assassination begins. There's no logical reasoning behind why Andy would choose to leave his stable relationship, his healthy relationship with Jessica, to date a woman that has expressed a desire for his girlfriend to die. That's a red flag to me. I'm sorry. It's a red flag. I can't express how much of a red flag that is. It's not like she said it and he overheard it, or she said it to somebody else and he was told by them. Like, she said it to his face. So that's not romantic in my opinion. That's definitely a red flag. But moving on. So Andy drives down to Florida to pick up Aaron with the intention of dating her. However, he's still in a relationship with Jessica at this time. So what happens next is completely disrespectful and horrible. And I'm honestly I usually skip this episode when I'm rewatching The Office because it just makes me cringe so hard. I feel so bad for Jessica, and she's not even a real person. He drives to Jessica's family cabin with his ex-girlfriend in tow to break up with her. While her friends are enjoying a lovely bachelorette party weekend. So assuming that Andy and Jessica have good communication in the relationship, I mean, he knew where she was, so she must have told him that she was going for a bachelorette party. So he knew that her and all of her friends were going to be there. So dumping your girlfriend for your ex-girlfriend in front of all of your girlfriend's friends, it's messed up. Yeah, it definitely is messed up. He could have put it off. He could have waited to get her alone. There were just so many better ways that he could have done this if he really felt he had to break up with Jessica, which he didn't. He could have stayed with Jessica. But Andy doesn't tell Jessica that Aaron is the reason he's breaking up with her. At least not at first. Andy tells Jessica that he's gay. He can't even give her the respect of telling her the truth, which again doesn't make sense for his character, especially considering what he went through with Angela, where she was cheating on him while they were engaged. You would think that Andy would have a bit more respect for somebody that he's in a relationship with, because he knows what it feels like to be disrespected in a relationship. But apparently he doesn't. The writers just completely forgot about this element of his character, and instead he just tells her that he's gay. So Andy can't even give Jessica the respect of telling her the truth until he does, right? So he comes back to tell Jessica that he's not gay and he's actually in love with Erin, his ex-girlfriend. While she's crying and being comforted by her friends because of the breakup, he comes back and tells her, oh, guess what? I'm actually not gay. I just really want to bang my ex-girlfriend. I mean, that's not how he said it, but come on. And he does this to please Erin because Erin is upset about his lie that he told. Not because lying to Jessica itself is wrong. So he does this to please Erin because she's feeling insecure that he wouldn't just come out and say, I'm in love with Erin. I love her so much and that's why I want to be with her and not you, Jessica. And yeah, so that's the reason he tells Jessica the truth, is because it's going to upset his future girlfriend rather than trying to respect his ex-girlfriend. This is So rather than out of respect for Jessica, rather than because he feels badly for lying to Jessica, he tells Jessica the truth because of how Aaron feels. And Aaron feels upset because his lie to Jessica was a slight to her, because by lying to Jessica, Andy's basically implying that he's embarrassed to be with Aaron, which I don't blame him. First of all, it is kind of embarrassing to break up with your girlfriend for your ex-girlfriend. That's never a good conversation to have, but I honestly wish if it had to be done, it should have been done out of more respect for Jessica, because again, she was lovely and she didn't deserve it. We want to root for Andy to find love though, so even though this moment is cringy, we do find ourselves rooting for Andy and Aaron in their relationship. We want them to thrive. We want them to be successful. We want Andy to find that love that he deserves and never let it go. However, their relationship sucks. It just sucks, you guys. It sucks. The instability of the Andy-Aaron relationship continues all the way into season 9. Remember how we talked about how Andy was so good at being a manager and we were so proud and so happy for him? Well, in season 8, episode 21, Andy gets fired for punching a hole in the wall. We've seen this before, right? Yes. To answer your question, we have. Before Andy went to anger management classes, the event that sparked him getting sent to anger management was him punching a hole in the same exact wall. So this is a callback to that, I guess, but why? What about all the progress he made, you guys? Anyway, all the progress Andy made in anger management is apparently lost. So Andy is angry because Nellie has taken his job. She literally sat herself down in his empty chair and refused to not be the manager. And the CEO of the company is not the best at being in charge of people. He basically is like, figure it out, you know? Like, I like this idea. She sat in the chair. Why not let her be manager? So after the breakup with Jessica, I consider this the second step in the downfall of Andy's character. I kind of feel like Aaron is to blame for this downfall. Nellie never would have found Andy's chair empty had he not been driving down to Florida to go get Aaron. It was because she found that chair empty that she declared herself a manager. And it seems to me that the moment that Andy and Aaron decide to start a relationship again is the moment where things really go wrong for Andy's character. It's definitely the point in the story where we can see Andy's character starts to suffer. In episode 22, unemployed Andy goes to a fundraiser where all of his former coworkers are and proceeds to adopt a bunch of shelter dogs. Yeah. So in episode 22, we see unemployed Andy at his lowest point. Despite never expressing an interest in creative writing, he has apparently written a rock opera. And this rock opera has a plot that is pretty transparently about him getting fired and wanting revenge against Robert California. But while it's a completely ridiculous moment, it does at least speak to Andy's willingness to work on himself and his willingness to persevere even when he has setbacks in life. And while a rock opera is probably not the best way to go about it, and it is definitely motivated by revenge for losing his job, we can still at least admire Andy's attempt to better himself. Again, it's completely ridiculous, but he does seem to still be consistently trying to better himself. Now, in episodes 23 and 24, Andy gets David Wallace to buy Dunder Mifflin and reinstate him as the manager. I honestly don't understand why the writers felt the need to have Andy lose his job if they were just gonna put him back in the management position within a few episodes, literally a few episodes later. And unfortunately, it continues to go downhill for Andy in season 9. Andy is sent to management training by David Wallace. We know this because in the first episode of season 9, he returns from that training and he seems pretty hyped to be the manager again. It seems that the training has really rubbed off on him. He seems to have good morale. He seems to be excited to be in charge again. And that's something I really like about Andy's character. I like his willingness to go through training and to better himself, whether it's for his anger management issues or for his confidence and job skills. I think it's a good contrast to Michael Scott's character, who didn't want to admit he was wrong ever. He didn't seem to want to improve on himself ever. When Michael was forced to go through therapy because he physically assaulted an employee, which was his nephew, but that's still one of the moments I like to skip over. But anyway, when he was forced to go to therapy, he was unwilling to talk about the incident, unwilling to talk about himself. He really didn't want to open up. And I know part of the reason was because he was talking to Toby. But again, this is something that's not really a respectable trait for a manager to have, you know. So I really like that Andy does seem to have this trait where he's willing to work on himself and he's willing to better himself. I think the way that Andy embraces positive change is very good for his character. But unfortunately, it is a character trait that the writers seem to just throw out the window. In season 9, episode 6, The Boat, we get another good Andy moment. And we have another Andy's dad is a jerk moment. Except this time it's because Andy's father has drained the family bank accounts and run off with his mistress to Argentina. So this starts off as a great Andy moment. Andy has to help with the finances. He has to help try to keep his family together. We see him in his office trying to sell off items in order to keep his family's finances under control and to put his mother up in an apartment because she has nowhere to live now that she can't afford the house. And this is a really great moment of maturity for Andy. Even with the way his family has treated him, the lack of acceptance he's felt from his parents, the competition for attention that he's been forced into with his younger brother, despite all of these things, Andy's still very willing to help out his mother, and willing to help out his brother, willing to just kind of save his family from complete financial ruin, which I think is a really, really mature decision for him. I also think that without the garden party episode, this moment wouldn't have felt as genuine for Andy. Because we had that moment where Andy was accepted by his peers finally, and he realized he didn't need his father's acceptance to be happy, it allows Andy to approach this situation with maturity, without being emotional, which again we know is a problem for him in the past with his anger management issues. So the fact that he is very calm about this and seems to be composed and seems to be able to handle it, I think really speaks to some good character development. I definitely think that without the garden party episode, Andy might have been angry at his father for abandoning the family. He possibly might have reverted back into angry Andy and his pre-anger management Andy. He might have fallen into a depression, you know, because he was always trying to gain his father's approval. But instead, because we had that character development shown to us in the garden party episode, we get this version of Andy that's actually really mature, really well-rounded, seems to be able to handle a really difficult situation that his upbringing did not prepare him for. So when Andy goes to sell the family boat, he gets a little bit nostalgic and he finds himself wanting one last trip on the boat. So he decides to take one last trip on the boat with his brother. This is where the writers once again have decided to completely disrespect Andy's character development, honestly. What I think could have been written as Andy trying to piece his family back together, gaining a better relationship with his brother, and potentially finding a greater purpose in his life, you know, really going on a journey of self-exploration. This act of him going off on the boat is instead told to us from Erin's point of view. And Erin's point of view is that of slighted girlfriend who's upset that her boyfriend went on a long boat trip without her, and barely contacts her the entire time. So we don't really get to see how Andy handles this trip or what it does for his character, because we only really get Erin's point of view, which is that Andy abandoned her and she's upset, which again, that's valid, but I don't think that it really helps Andy's character at all. No, I understand that the reason the writers created Andy's boat trip was because Ed Helms, the actor who plays Andy, was actually off filming one of the Hangover movies, I believe. Um, the writers needed a way to have his character be gone for most of the season without writing his character off of the show completely. So they had him go off on a boat trip, which, I mean, is a good idea. It's better than him being in a coma or having cancer or any of the usual tropes that we see in like soap operas. Um, I definitely don't agree with the way that they did this, however. I think the boat trip could have been done effectively, but again, it turns into another horrible Andy as manager moment. It, instead of being a positive thing for Andy's character, it really drags him down. It's definitely part of his character assassination. Do you guys remember mature Andy? How well he handled his family's affairs after his father abandoned them? Yeah, you remember him? Because I think the writers forgot. While Andy's on his boat trip, he doesn't quit his job, which would have been a good idea for him to do, to quit his job. I mean, yeah, he needs the money, but he's going to be gone for 3 months. You can't just take a 3-month vacation from most jobs. So it would have been a good idea for him to quit his job, but he doesn't. He still pretends to his boss, who is the man that rehired him and sent him to management training out of the kindness of his heart, basically. He still pretends to him that he's at work and doing his job effectively. Someone who has been an overall positive figure in his life, he just flat out lies to, telling him that he's at work for 3 whole months. On top of lying to his boss, he also doesn't email his girlfriend very often. He contacts David Wallace to keep up the charade more often than he contacts his girlfriend. And remember, this is the same girl that he left a stable relationship for. There's something to be said about Erin's effect on Andy and how she causes a lot of his moments of instability. Erin herself deserves a better partner than somebody who ignores her for 3 months, basically. I totally agreed with the writer's decision to give her another romantic interest, but I don't necessarily agree with how Andy just falls back into being immature and disrespectful towards Erin and her new partner. Again, it is his fault that the relationship ended because he basically abandoned her. So the fact that he's immature towards the fact that she has a new love interest is like, dude, you can't be upset. It's your fault. In season 9, episode 16, Andy rehires Gabe, who is Erin's ex, and he also hires an ex-girlfriend of her new man, whose name is Pete. So he hires Pete's ex-girlfriend, and he hires Erin's ex-boyfriend, and he intentionally hires 2 new people that they don't even need in the office just to make his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend uncomfortable. Because he's uncomfortable about them having a relationship. All of the character development from the beginning of season 8 completely officially thrown out the window here. And then Andy enters into yet another downward spiral. In season 9, episode 18 is when the promos for the documentary come out. And Andy's upset by comments on the internet telling him that he's a loser, that he doesn't have any talent. And considering what we know Andy has had to deal with in terms of being accepted by his peers and his family and just humans in general, he's come a long way. You would expect him to react better to this, but unfortunately, the writers forgot about all of that. They forgot about his struggles with being accepted, and they forgot that they had made him not immature. So Andy is upset by comments on the internet, basically saying that he doesn't have any talent. We see this insecurity turning into him finding a talent agent, I think in episode 20. And then he quits his job, the job he just got back, you guys. He quits his job in episode 21 to focus on his non-existent acting career. In order to solidify his exit from the company, I guess, Andy poops on David Wallace's car too, which was completely unnecessary. It wasn't necessary for his character, it wasn't necessary for the story. Yeah. And I think that they just put this in here to give us a cheap laugh, but it's not even funny. It's gross out humor is something that's very American, and as an American, I don't understand it at all. I don't want to see throw up, I don't want to see poop, I don't want to see anything that comes out of anybody's body. So Andy's character ends the show with this. He tries to audition for a singing competition show, and when they don't have time to see his audition, he sits in front of the judges and cries. This becomes a viral video, and he's a laughingstock of literally everywhere he goes. Everybody knows him. They remix the song. I know this was kind of an attempt to be relevant because this was the climate of the internet at the time, was a lot of auto-tuned videos of people doing or saying stupid things. But I really hate that this is the end that they ultimately chose for Andy's character. The things that viewers and fans of Andy wanted his character to gain, so respect from his family, a healthy relationship, and success in his career, were all things that were in the works at the beginning of season 8. And then they were just completely turned around so that we were left with this version of Andy that doesn't get any of these things and is even more annoying, I think, than when he started the show in season 2. At the end of the series, we feel like Andy's character has a bunch of loose ends, and there's no real healthy conclusion for his character at all. At least not one that makes sense. I think with a few simple changes, all of this tragic, horrible stuff could have been avoided. The character assassination could have been avoided, and Andy could have ended up one of my favorite characters in The Office. And I wouldn't have to defend that to people. People would understand. So I wanted to share some changes that I think could have been made that would have improved Andy's story. Changes that I think would have given Andy an ending that he deserved. An ending that Andy's fans would have been happy with. First of all, they shouldn't have had him punch a hole in the wall and get fired for it. After going through anger management training, Andy hadn't had a blowout like this since the one that caused him to punch the wall the first time. I think it would have made more sense for them to just have Andy wait and calculate an opportunity for him to get his job back. If they had skipped the whole awkward rock opera part and had just had him approach David Wallace with an opportunity and just approached David Wallace with the idea that David Wallace should buy the company, I think that would have been better. It definitely still would have worked for the plot. You could have David Wallace take over the company again without causing Andy's character development to suffer. Honestly, I think it would have made more sense for Andy, who has learned to be more patient, to be quietly calculating his revenge on Nellie, quietly thinking up his next move on how he's going to get his job back, rather than just punching a hole in the wall. He has learned some business skills in his short time as manager. He has learned some communication skills. So I think for him to sell Dunder Mifflin to David Wallace, to get David Wallace to agree to buy Dunder Mifflin based on his pitch, that was a nice way to show that his sales ability, which had practically not existed before, has really improved. Again, it definitely could have been done without making us have to cringe at Andy's character. Secondly, the mutual respect between Andy and his employees is completely tossed aside. When Andy goes off on the boat for 3 months, the office is just fine working without him. They even exceed their sales for the quarter, and Andy ends up getting a bonus check for it. Not only has Andy abandoned his employees, the people who were there for him, even when his own father wouldn't accept him, but he also takes the reward for their hard work, knowing that he had absolutely nothing to do with it. This selfishness comes out of nowhere. Sure, Andy going on a 3-month boat trip was definitely a jerk move, but it could have made sense for his character development had it been done the right way. Again, it could have been a really positive thing for Andy. Andy could have spent the time on the boat bonding with his brother, maybe learning something about himself, maybe picking up some new hobbies, you know? It definitely could have been a trip of self-discovery. This could have been the turning point in Andy's career, the moment when he decides whether or not he's really happy being a manager of Dunder Mifflin, or if maybe he needs to move on and find something else. So, assuming that the writers didn't want to write Andy's character off of the show, he wouldn't choose to follow his artistic dreams at this point. He would definitely stick with being manager, right? Maybe he could have stuck with his hobbies outside of work, like still doing things with the local theater, or potentially even volunteering or teaching a class at Cornell. Even if it had to be done online, he could still work for his alma mater, you know? He didn't have to completely give up on his dreams. He just could have focused more on his career at Dunder Mifflin. After the boat trip, it would only make sense for Aaron to dump Andy for not paying attention to her. But let's imagine a universe where Andy doesn't dump Jessica for Aaron. For the sake of not changing the story too much, we could have Andy still pick Aaron up from Florida. But what if he makes it to Florida and she confesses her undying love for him? We could have Andy call her out for her manipulation. He could call her out for being jealous of his happiness with Jessica. He could offer to help her as a friend, you know? In order for them to keep working together, they must remain friendly. So I think this could have worked. Andy is well within his right to talk to HR about the comments that she made about wishing Jessica was dead. He's well within his right to tell HR that these comments made him uncomfortable and that he's not sure if he's comfortable working with Aaron. In order to keep Aaron's character in the office environment, the writers couldn't have let this happen, though. They wouldn't let her get fired, so they wouldn't have Andy talk to HR. Wishing someone dead, even if they don't work with you, wishing the significant other of your boss dead is a good way to lose your job. So imagining Andy keeps this information to himself, he can still let Aaron know that her comments were inappropriate and unacceptable, and that if she happens to say something like that again, it could end her career at Dunder Mifflin. Imagine Andy decides to be a good leader again, to lift one of his employees up from their lowest moment, to literally drive down to Florida and bring an employee back with him, not because he's in love with her, but because she's a valued member of the workplace, and the office as a whole is worried about her just throwing away her career to live in Florida for no reason. Andy didn't have to get back with Aaron. It doesn't make sense for his character development anyway, and not for hers either, in my opinion. It didn't make sense for the writers to just throw the two of them back together just to split them apart again either. If Andy had never gotten back with Aaron, we wouldn't have that horrible moment where we hate his character for being completely oblivious to her feelings and abandoning her for 3 months. We wouldn't have had to see that version of Andy at all. We wouldn't have to be angry with Andy over this. And Aaron still could have ended up with Pete easily. So I think if they had written it this way, it wouldn't have changed anything at all. In regards to the other employees, they could have acted like they supported Andy on his boat trip. The other employees could have chosen to understand that Andy's family was going through a rough time, that Andy himself was probably going through a really rough time, and that he needed to step away in order to, help his mental health. All the writers had to do was add in some dialogue alluding to the fact that he was still in contact with his employees. Maybe something like, oh, Andy sent us his weekly email updates, or Andy responded to your notes, or the transcript from yesterday's meeting. It wouldn't be the first time either that employees at Dunder Mifflin had overlooked their boss's misconduct. Also, while it would be unethical for him to take the bonus money, he could have chosen to share it with everybody at the office, maybe even thrown a big party with the money in true Michael Scott fashion. That would have really reinforced the idea that Andy respects and appreciates his employees. There was absolutely no reason for the character assassination that happened on Andy's character during the last 2 seasons. Why did the writers feel the need to make Andy the butt of the joke, and not even a funny joke at that? They were on the right track with Andy's character at the beginning of season 8. He had everything that fans wanted him to gain in his grasp, and he managed to ruin every single one of them by the end of the series. Back to the singing audition. While Andy embarrassing himself on America's Next Acapella Sensation seemed to be in character for him, I think it's because that would be in character if we were talking about old Andy, not manager Andy. Manager Andy has learned that he doesn't need approval from other people. Manager Andy has learned how to make mature decisions. Manager Andy puts his focus more on the people he cares about rather than on his personal interests. Manager Andy does not hurt his girlfriend by ditching her unexpectedly for an ex. Manager Andy doesn't hurt his coworkers by abandoning them for 3 months without contact. And then pretending that it never happened and taking a reward that is given to him because they did so well without him. Manager Andy is grateful for the successes he has achieved in his personal growth and in his career, and he doesn't just leave his job on a whim for some lofty dream of being an actor. Anyway, it seems to me that the writers intentionally sabotaged Andy's character. Whether this was just an attempt to get more laughs or it was someone's personal vision for the character, it came out of nowhere, in my opinion. These things I've mentioned that weren't consistent with his character development are things that could have been so easily changed. They are things that could have been rewritten in order to make Andy's character make a bit more sense in the last few seasons. So, like I said, a lot of his decisions that he makes don't make sense for his character. They don't follow the development that he's gone through. There are a lot of really great moments when Andy's manager, and I really wish they hadn't ruined his opportunity to be the kind of boss that the office needs, you know? And so, again, I struggle to like Andy following the end of the series. I struggle to feel closure for the character and for his story. I like to pretend that only the positive moments in season 8 and 9 happened and that the other ones just kind of didn't exist. Again, this gets confusing when people want to ask me why I like Andy's character because they're like, you did know he did XYZ. Like, no, we just pretend that doesn't exist. I don't want to think about it. So I have found myself defending Andy's character to those people who think Andy is the absolute worst. Because on the surface, yeah, he definitely did not end as a strong character, but there was potential there for sure. So anyway, that's my analysis of Andy's character development and the last few seasons where things go wrong. So if there's any characters from The Office that you want my perspective on that I haven't talked about already, you can definitely let me know in the comments below. Make sure to like this video if you agree with me about Andy's character development. I definitely know a lot of people that say they wanted to like Andy and that he was their favorite during certain moments, but that ultimately he's annoying and he's one of the worst characters. So let me know in the comments below if maybe I changed your perspective on Andy's character too. But yeah, definitely like this video, share it to your friends, follow, subscribe to my channel. I am starting some new projects. I have some new projects in the works, so you might see another video up very soon. So thank you so much for watching. Check out my video that I did before on why Karen is the worst and I hate her. That's not actually what it's titled, but I'm not a fan of Karen, so check that one out. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.